So I am so happy to introduce Robert Waggoner to you today. Robert is a lucid dreaming expert with many decades of deep and rich experience in this field. He is the author of 2 acclaimed books on the subject and the co-editor of the Lucid Dreaming Exchange, a free quarterly online publication. He has spoken at conferences and colleges and led workshops all around the world. And he'll be leading an online workshop with IONS. I could go on and on about his many wonderful contributions to the field, but let me stop here so we can get right to Robert and say, welcome, Robert. We're so happy you're with us here today to share about lucid dreams and the deceased. And please take it away.
Great. Thank you so much. I'm going to shift over to my PowerPoint, and I hope we can get that right up. Can everyone see that okay?
Yep, that looks great. Thank you.
Okay, super. Well, so what I wanted to talk about today is the deceased, dreams, and lucid dreams, because this is such a rich area for exploration, for investigation. Many of us have had personal experiences engaging the deceased in dreams or lucid dreams, and it's really a fascinating area to explore. There's so much you could talk about in terms of near-death experiences, shared death experiences, and all of that, but I'm going to just jump into where I think the research is currently focused, and that's in what people call end-of-life dreams and visions. And why end-of-life dreams and visions have gained such prominence is that here in the last 30 or 40 years of hospice care, many of the hospice staff noted that their clients would often have what they called end-of-life dreams. And so these normally had similar themes that kept appearing over and over. And first it was that the clientele would say that in a dream or a vision, they saw deceased family members or they saw deceased friends. And so this was a common feature. Oftentimes you would also hear that they would share how they were preparing for a trip or preparing for a journey. They would find themselves at the train station waiting for the next train, or they're getting ready to get on the ship to take the long journey. And so that was another common theme of these end-of-life dreams. Also, there were often similar messages from the deceased family members or the friends there. And sometimes those similar messages would be, it's not time yet. And it was interesting to see that kind of message prevailing, that it wasn't time yet, because it suggests that the time was actually, in some sense, determined. And then there were also an interesting aspect that sometimes animals appeared in these end-of-life dream themes. Sometimes it was family pets, but oftentimes it was birds. And so we can think of birds being something that lands here on Earth, but flies up into the sky and all. I remember reading in this one report published by Cambridge University Press, the woman in the hospice told the staff that a robin was going to come and get her and take her away to a beautiful place. And what was interesting is that when the woman passed away, suddenly a robin landed right outside the window and was there when the woman passed. And so it's really interesting to see how in hospice, we're beginning to see these common end-of-life dreams and vision themes. Now, the majority of end-of-life dreams and visions turn out to be comforting, turn out to be positive, and so that's all for the good. But there is a minority, probably 10%, that are a little bit stressful or concerning. So you have that in the literature. When you look at end-of-life dreams and visions, it appears that about 60% of the clients in hospice have end-of-life dreams and visions. And so there was a survey done by Catherine Levy and others where they decided to interact with hospice patients who had experienced end-of-life dreams and visions and hospice patients who had not. And what they discovered is that there were really significant differences that emerged between these two groups. Those who had had end-of-life dreams and visions reported having greater sense of personal strength. They also reported a sense of spiritual change, or kind of a new engagement with the spiritual realm. Overall, that they had a better sense of growth and higher scores on all the subscales. And so it seemed like, for the most part, these end-of-life dreams and visions come for the good and make a difference in the lives of those who are getting ready to pass. Now, part of the problematic area of end-of-life dreams and visions is that sometimes these are written off as moments of delirium or having to do with medications. But in a particular study done by Rachel Deppner and others, that they compared delirium to the end-of-life dream and vision experiences as reported by the hospice clients. And delirium was oftentimes connected to agitated movements, disorganized, confused thinking, withdrawn, disconnected ways of relating to others, a feeling of distress, a sense of disbelief, and those kind of things. But when they compared that to end-of-life dreams and visions, these all seemed to occur when people were mild and in rest. They had a heightened acuity or cognitive ability and recall. They felt engaged and connected to their environment. They felt comforted and calm. They felt that the experience had a sense of reality to it. And oftentimes that reality was peaceful and transcendent. And so you begin to see that these are two truly different experiences, delirium that sometimes occurs and an end-of-life dream and vision. Now, there's a whole nother types of dreams that connect with passing, and those are precognitive dreams of passing. Sometimes we have them about loved ones. Sometimes the person who's going to pass has it themselves. And because I was thinking of Queen Elizabeth here in the past a few weeks, it reminded me that back in April of 1865, Abraham Lincoln had a dream. And he told his staff the dream at a staff meeting. He said he heard people crying. And so he got out of bed. He began to walk around from room to room looking for all this crying. And finally, he made it to the East Room of the White House, where he found a covered corpse that was being guarded by soldiers and surrounded by mourners. And so Lincoln turned to a soldier and asked, "Who is dead in the White House?" And the soldier replies, "The president. He was killed by an assassin." What was interesting about this is at first it was reported by one staff members, but here in the last 5 or 10 years, they've also found it recorded in the diaries of some of the people who attended dinner with Abraham Lincoln in the week or two before his death. He told the same dream. So what's interesting, first, he learns that it's the president who passes away, and he passes away by being killed by an assassin. So I think that's really a fascinating dream experience. Also, there's other records of Abraham Lincoln mentioning how important dreams were in his own life. In fact, he said whenever anything big happened in his life, he would dream of a giant boat sailing away into the distance. And his staffers reported that the day he died, he told them that that morning he knew something big was going to happen because he dreamt the big boat came and sailed off into the distance. It's interesting too, when you look through the literature, there's even a case, a probate court case, where the deceased dream figure managed to overturn a will. And so this happened in North Carolina, a court case of James L. Chaffin. And so in this family, a few years after he passed, the deceased father appeared in a dream of one of the sons and told him, "You will find my will in my overcoat pocket." And the son was surprised to hear that because they had settled the will years earlier. But he did like his father said in the dream, and he went and found the overcoat. He realized that sewn behind the pocket was a piece of paper. And so he cut open the jacket and pulled out the strip of paper. And his father had handwriting that told him to go to a certain passage in the family's Bible. And so now the son decides to get some witnesses to come with him. And so he goes to the home to get the family Bible. They turn to the passage, and now they discover there's a more recent will than the original will that was probated in court. And this more recent will equally divides the property amongst all the family members. And so they brought it to court, and incredibly, they won, basically through the intervention, apparently, of this deceased dream figure. There's also been some wonderful reports by Bruce Grayson at the University of Virginia. He writes in a piece he calls "Seeing People Not Known to Have Died, Peak and Darien Experiences." And he shares all of these accounts of people who in dreams and similar experiences learn of someone who's passed away who they weren't aware of. And so here would be an example. There was a 9-year-old, Eddie Cuomo. He fell into an 18-hour fever. He was in the hospital. And when he wakes from the fever, he describes how he met his deceased grandpa, his aunt and uncle, who were both deceased, and his 19-year-old sister. And everyone thought that was a little bit odd until they returned home from the hospital and found out that the college where the 19-year-old sister was at had been calling them, trying to contact them because she had died in a car accident 2 days earlier. So, of course, no one in the family knew that she had passed, but the 9-year-old in his dream experience during his fever found that information. So again, these are all wonderful stories of how dreams sometimes inform us of those who have passed away and keep us connected to that inner realm. Now, after people pass, there's a category of dreams that dream workers call visitation dreams. And these are ones that Patricia Garfield in her book, The Dream Messenger, mentions. She points out that there's various types of these visitation dreams. Normally, they begin as the deceased appears, sometimes days or weeks after they pass, to say, "I'm doing fine," or "I'm okay," or something like that. So they're very comforting dreams. Sometimes the deceased doesn't appear in the dream. Instead, they communicate via a phone call, and oftentimes to share the same message, that I'm doing fine or I'm okay. Then there's other visitation dreams where the deceased appears and provides advice or guidance to their loved ones. And sometimes this can be quite interesting, the advice or guidance that they get, sometimes to let an issue go or focus on their skills or whatever. But it's often interesting to see that advice or guidance. One thing that you almost always note in these visitation dreams is that the dreamer says that the deceased dream figure oftentimes appears younger and healthier than they were when they passed. And so that's a common theme that occurs. Also, in these visitation dreams, sometimes they're to say farewell. And so these might be in cases where they live far away and suddenly they appear in the dream saying that they're going to leave on a trip now, or they've come to say goodbye. And then the person wakes to discover that overnight the person had passed away. And of course, sometimes these visitation dreams may symbolize the dreamer's grief. I recall when my father passed away about 20 years ago, that first week or so, I would see him at an airport, and we were always at the TWA boarding area. And we didn't interact really, but I just noticed, oh, there's Dad. He's there at the TWA booth. And then when I woke up, it finally occurred to me that TWA stands for Trans World Airlines. And I thought, oh, that's why that symbol keeps appearing, that I'm coming to grips with this idea that my dad is moving to the land of the deceased, if we want to put it like that. So he's obviously going to take a TWA flight. Now, from a research perspective, there's a problem to most all of this, and that's that it's mostly anecdotal. It's difficult to kind of replicate this kind of experience, to put it in some sort of scientific experiment or framework. And then people oftentimes complain that the end-of-life dreams and visions, they might connect to medications or delirium or something like that. And oftentimes the visitation dreams, they might be symbolic in nature, symbolizing grief or whatever. So oftentimes this turns to be symbolic, or oftentimes turns to be problematic for others who are trying to wrap their head around dreams of the deceased. And that's when I think that lucid dreaming may provide the solution. Because in a lucid dream, from a scientific research perspective, it allows a person to experiment, not only your own personal experiments, but you can also conduct scientific experiments when you become consciously aware in the dream state and this is a dream. Also, because of that, then other researchers can replicate those experiments, which is important for science. And frequently, the lucid dreamer isn't on any sort of medication, isn't suffering from any end-of-life condition or grief or anything. So it's not necessarily a function of medication or something like that. And the beautiful thing about lucid dreaming, it just provides an open platform to explore these kind of questions and see what might come up. So for those of you who might not know, a lucid dream is defined as a dream in which the sleeper is aware that he or she is dreaming and may be able to influence the progress of the dream narrative. That comes from the American Psychological Association Dictionary. For most of us lucid dreamers, we'd say a lucid dream is any dream in which you realize within the dream that you're dreaming. You literally know, hey, this is a dream. I'm dreaming this. Now, lucid dreaming has a long, long history. In shamanic cultures, they say for many thousands of years, they've been using lucid dreaming. And oftentimes there's secret societies in these shamanic cultures who practice things like lucid dreaming and out-of-body experiences and learn how to explore in their system. But also Buddhists have what they call Buddhist dream yoga. And so Naropa said that Buddhist dream yoga, where you use lucid dreaming and connect it with Buddhist principles, it is one of the 6 pathways to enlightenment. And so dream yoga oftentimes requires a 3-year dream yoga monastery program to become proficient in Buddhist dream yoga. Also in Sufism down here for 1,000 years, they've been talking about how you could use lucid dreaming to connect to the divine. So it has a long, deep spiritual history to it, lucid dreaming. But the scientific evidence for lucid dreaming dates from the mid-70s. Keith Hearne at the University of Hull was the first one to bring a lucid dreamer into the sleep lab. And he told them, now, when you become lucidly aware, I want you to signal by moving your eyes left to right 8 times, and we'll pick that up on the rapid eye movement readout pad, and that'll provide evidence for lucid dreaming. Stephen LaBerge came up with basically the same idea about 2.5 years later, and he was one of the first persons to publish his research there at Stanford and became kind of considered the father of modern lucid dreaming research. So here would be an example of what that looks like. You can see the LOC and the ROC, that's the left ocular and the right ocular. Normally in the REM state, we're dreaming. And you can see the eyes are just moving every which way as we go along throughout the dream here. But about midway in that second level, all of a sudden the eyes move in tandem, left, right, left, right, left, right. The person signaling, hey, I'm consciously aware here in the dream. Here in the third level, you can see they're signaling again. And oftentimes this is to signal that they're beginning a scientific experiment. And then here at the fourth level, they're signaling again, oftentimes to say, I'm ending the experiment. And then they might signal before they come out of the lucid dream and awake. But that's how the scientific evidence for lucid dreaming emerged. That's called the eye signal verification technique. Now, in normal dreams, we just react to whatever happens. We create a story, we just lack any sort of sense of critical awareness. But in a lucid dream, that's suddenly when you realize, wait a second, Godzilla, that's a fictional character created by Hollywood. And so now in a lucid dream, you have some level of critical awareness. You can decide how you're going to respond. You can seek out insights or do experiments and all that sort of thing. So that really gives an advantage to lucid dreaming. The beautiful thing about lucid dreaming is you'll see that there's been a lot of work neurologically exploring the state. Here they had a 19-channel EEG on lucid dreamers, and they told them, of course, to signal when they became lucidly aware. So here at this top image is the lucid dreamer while they're awake, and you can see the cerebral cortex is very active. Here at the bottom, you can see this is the same person when they're in a dream, and the cerebral cortex is not very active. But here in the middle is when they've signaled, hey, I'm lucidly aware. And so you can see that the cerebral cortex seems to be more active. So these researchers called lucid dreaming a hybrid state of consciousness because there was simultaneous activation of normal dreaming and activation in the cerebral cortex. There's another examination where Martin Dressler and others had a person who not only had the EEG skull cap, but they are also in an fMRI, which measured when the person became lucidly aware and could actually pinpoint to the more active parts of the brain. And these parts of the brain were parts of the brains that dealt with self-assessment, evaluating our own thoughts and feelings, and self-perception. And these are all things that lucid dreamers have talked about. They're aware, they're in a dream. Now they have to decide what do they want to do, and now they perceive themselves moving through the dream environment. Of course, when you ask college students, have you ever had a lucid dream or realized within a dream that you're dreaming? About 70% of students say that, oh yeah, they've had that experience. And about 25% say that they have it frequently, at least one time a month. So it's actually relatively common. Now, when people ask me, why would anyone bother to lucid dream? You know, these are the reasons I tell them. You can enhance your skills in lucid dreams. And there's some scientific research on that. You can access creativity outside of your own knowing. You can resolve emotional issues. Recently, IONS did a study with lucid dreaming and people who had PTSD. You can use it, I believe, for physical healing. You can access an inner awareness. You can use it for spiritual growth. Like I said, it's an open platform for you to experience. So here's some examples of lucid dreamers interacting with the deceased. And what I like about this and why I think it's valuable for science is when you become lucidly aware, you can seek out verifiable information. In the first example, this is by a woman, Laura Lockard, who wrote this up for the Lucid Dreaming Experience magazine. She saw 3 of her deceased grandparents arguing. And she went up to she realized at that point that this was a dream, and she went up to see what it was all about. And one of them turned to her and said, if you wish to understand, then you need to go to the county courthouse. She told him what room to go to and what file to ask for, and mentioned a name that Laura had never heard of. And so when Laura woke from this, she thought, well, maybe this can solve the family secret, because she'd always noticed at family gatherings that one part of the family won't talk to other parts of the family. And so she goes to the county courthouse. She goes to the office, she asks for the particular name, and then gets this giant file. And what it showed is that decades earlier, someone in the extended family had decided to mortgage some of the family land that was held in common amongst all the family. And she was blown away to discover all of this because she had discovered the family secret. There's another wonderful example that was in our magazine by a young guy, and his name was Mars. And just to explain why this was so important, his parents divorced when he was young. Then his mother got cancer when he was a teenager, and she passed away. And so he said that when he graduated from high school, he was just very bitter. In fact, he became a bouncer at a bar, just in some part to beat up people who wouldn't leave the bar at closing time. And so one night he's sleeping and his mother appears, and his mother says, he becomes lucidly aware. And then after they talked, she said, I left something for you with our family friends, and tells him which family friends to contact. He said he wakes up from the lucid dream and he thinks, if there's something to this, then the family friends will confirm it. And he calls up the family friends, and they told him, we've been looking for you for 2 years now. You just disappeared off the face of the earth. And yes, your mother left all these boxes for you, and they were childhood things and all that she wanted him to have. And after that, when he picked all that up, he realized that there must be something more to life. And so he decided to get his life together and move forward. There's another wonderful example of a young guy from Detroit. His deceased mother appears, and he's just so excited to see her and becomes lucidly aware. And then after they chat about all sorts of family things and all, as she's beginning to disappear, she says 1968. And he thinks to himself, 1968, that was the year in Detroit when we actually had tanks going down the streets because of the riots. But he thought it was so odd that she said it 1968. And so that next day, he decided to play the Pick 4 lottery, and he told me he won the lottery. The numbers were 1968. So in all these cases, it seems like the person obtained verifiable information. There's a wonderful example of Ed Kellogg. He decided to experiment with this. So those acquaintances and friends that he knew that had recently passed away, he'd wait 3 or 4 months to give them time to adjust to their new surrounding. And then he would decide to lucidly seek them out. And on some occasions, he would find them. Oftentimes, like we'd mentioned, they'd have adopted a younger look. Sometimes they'd be surrounded by their hobbies. Some of them actually remained in a dream hospital and weren't very happy to see Ed, who tried to encourage them to realize that they had passed over and didn't need all this hospital equipment. But in the morning, Ed would make careful notes. Then he would call up the family of the deceased and ask if they'd like to get together. When they got together, the families always confirmed things that Ed didn't know about hobbies, about how they looked, about burial things that had happened, and all that kind of thing. And so this is another way where you could experimentally check that out. I remember my own niece, Jane, she told me that lucid dreams had no meaning. And so I encouraged her when she became lucidly aware to just shout out, hey, dream, show me something important for me to see. And so in her next lucid dream, she shouted out, hey, dream, show me something important for me to see. And that's when her great-grandmother suddenly appeared. And her great-grandmother told her that she had great timing because she gets out of purgatory tomorrow. And my niece Jane had to ask me, what's this purgatory that she was talking about? But in any case, as they talked, at the very end, the great-grandmother provided Jane some information. And Jane didn't know if the information was true or not. And so when she woke, she called me up. She said, what do I do with this information that has to do with my mother? And I told Jane to call up her mother and see if that information was correct. And she called up her mom. Her mom burst into tears. Her mom was just shocked that great-grandmother had provided that information that Jane had no knowledge of, but it was talked about the happiest times in Jane's mother's life. So in any case, lucid dreaming and the deceased sometimes can be a little bit complicated, because sometimes when the lucid dreamer meets the deceased, they become so emotional that they forget any other experimental goals. But other times, lucid dreamers meet the deceased and just feel that they exist as dream characters and refuse to engage them to differentiate that, to figure that out. And then other times you'll have the case like happened to me a few months after my dad passed. I just became lucidly aware and decided I'm going to go find my dad. And all the dream figures told me, it's not a good time. Don't do it. It's not a good time. And because they were all in unanimous opinion, I decided, maybe it's not a good time. I'm going to stand down and wait for my dad to come visit me, which he did years later. So one other area where lucid dreaming could be so important is with grief counseling. What if those who were in serious grief learned to lucid dream? Recently, I was doing a workshop with Chinese lucid dreamers, and one of the Chinese lucid dreamers became lucidly aware as her father was driving her along. Her father had passed away when she was a teenager. And after the father and her talked back and forth and he gave her advice, she asked him a question that had been bothering her for many years. She said, "Father, do you love me?" Because in waking life, her father had never told her that he loved her, that she could recall. And in the lucid dream, he replied, yes, indeed, he loved her. And he was there watching over her. So I'll just bring this all to an end now, but I think that lucid dreaming is a new way to explore this area of the deceased, and also gives us a new way to explore this idea of working through our grief after the passing of a loved one. So I'll bring it back to all of you, and thanks everyone for your attention.
Fantastic. Thank you, Robert. We have lots of good questions coming in. And just a reminder that you can put those in the Q&A. And hopefully we'll get to as many of these as possible. So Paul says, Elizabeth Kubler-Ross used to say that over thousands of anecdotes, she never heard of an end-of-life dream or near-death experience in which the people who appeared as deceased loved ones were still alive. Unerring accuracy, especially among children who were never greeted by someone who is still alive. Have you heard about this?
I think Paul has a good point that this seems to be the case. So it was interesting. I was at a funeral, a Quaker funeral here 2 summers ago. And at a Quaker funeral, they just passed the microphone to people who want to speak. And this one child stood up. He was the grandson named after the person who had passed away. And the night that grandfather passed away, grandfather appeared to this young man and told him that everything was okay, nothing to be concerned about. And when he woke, he told his parents, and then his parents told him that grandfather had passed away overnight. So it's really quite incredible to hear these anecdotes.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful. Paula asks, I've had recurring dreams the past few weeks about preparing for a trip, finding shoes, packing clothes. Should I be worried about dying?
It's interesting. Preparing for a trip could mean that something in life is changing, because Abraham Lincoln even mentioned that every time he had something important in his life happen, he would always see this boat getting ready to go. And it just became kind of a symbol that something was changing in his life. So I wouldn't necessarily say that you have anything to worry about necessarily, but on the other hand, it helps to work with our own specific dream interpretation to figure out what our own specific dream symbols mean.
Good to know. Beth asks, will you say something about animal companions coming to us?
Right. This is also something that's quite common in just regular dreaming. We dream of deceased animals, and oftentimes are there to be loved or be hugged or whatever. But what's interesting, sometimes in my lucid dreams, my cats have come to me. And what was so funny is when they talked in little cat voices and told me things that they wanted. And in the morning, I could confirm the things that they wanted. And that was really quite shocking. But also lucid dreamers have told me many examples of having deceased pets come to them, and they became lucidly aware and either had a conversation or interacted with the deceased pet. So, you know, it seems to suggest that they move on and exist in their own state of consciousness after death.
Beautiful. Let's see here. Oh, this is interesting. After my father's passing, I had a lot of dreams where he would tell me he faked his death. Is that a common theme for people who've lost loved ones?
Right. When you read a book like Patricia Garfield's The Dream Messenger on Visitation Dreams, oftentimes the deceased would say, "No, I'm alive," and would sit there and argue with the dreamer, you know, that actually they're still alive. And so saying that they faked their death and that they're still alive actually is relatively common, especially amongst a certain group of deceased dreamers.
Interesting. Very interesting.
I do recall one time I was away on a business trip and my wife's boss, his wife passed away. And so I knew I wasn't going to be able to come to the funeral. And that night, I see that coming up the stairwell is my wife's boss and his deceased wife. And so I became lucidly aware. And I said, "Dahlia, I'm so sorry that I won't be able to come to your funeral." And they said, "Funeral?" And they looked at each other and then they ran down the staircase. And I felt so bad because it had just been 24 hours. I don't really know if she had still figured out yet that she had passed over.
Wow, you can spill the beans even in the dream state.
Exactly.
How long does the lucid dream state tend to last? In my experience, the moment I realize I'm dreaming, I wake up.
Right. You know, in this upcoming workshop that we're going to have on lucid dreaming and living lucidly, that's one of the first things we try to teach people is how to not get so excited that they wake themselves up. There's like 3 or 4 things that you can do at the very beginning of the lucid dream to stabilize it and have a long lucid dream. And so I'm not going to go into all those right now, but the first thing is stay calm. Don't get too excited or you'll pop out.
Great. And Dana says, is it not recommended to explore lucid dreaming during pregnancy?
You know, I have never heard of anyone who's said that to me before. In fact, I've had a number of people tell me the opposite, that they would become lucidly aware while they were pregnant and go and check on their yet to be born child. And some people have actually reported interacting with, I'll just say, that child and learning things about it, and sometimes even learning what name it wants to be called. So I've never heard anyone having a concern about having a lucid dream while pregnant.
We've got a couple of questions about your books. Do you want to share a bit about how they differ from each other and what people will find in them?
Right. So my first book, Lucid Dreaming: Gateway to the Inner Self, it's the one that kind of goes over my history of lucid dreaming. I taught myself how to lucid dream in 1975, and this was like 5 years before the scientific evidence emerged. And so the great thing about it was I learned all of these techniques and how to stabilize a lucid dream and all just by doing, basically. And then when the scientific evidence came out, I got more deeper into it. But that first book is about my journey and also covers these areas, like there's a chapter on interacting with the deceased in lucid dreams, physical healing in lucid dreams, trying to get information outside of space and time, that is precognitive information in lucid dreams. So the first book, it just blows open this whole area of lucid dreaming. The second book, Lucid Dreaming Plain and Simple, is all about the tips and techniques on how to become lucid, how to stay lucid, how to experiment successfully, and how to get to a place where you can do the unimaginable.
And we also have a few questions asking about how to become lucidly aware. So I'm assuming that's the second book. You're also hosting your upcoming workshop and.
Right. And this workshop goes on for 30 days, which gives people a lot of time to practice. And my co-instructor, Jillian Thetford, will be there to help me. It's often a lot of fun. Also, I do want to say that in my workshops, one thing I've noticed is that in the week before, oftentimes the participants tell me that they have dreams of deceased loved ones. And so I think this is the deceased loved ones realize that, oh, if they learn how to lucid dream, now we can engage each other back to forth while consciously aware in the altered state of lucid dreaming. And so that's really interesting to see how that happens.
That's cool. Brenda says, can you have a lucid dream of a person who passed a very long time ago? And also, is lucid dreaming connected to strong feelings?
You know, it's interesting. I interviewed a young guy for our magazine, the Lucid Dreaming Experience, and he reported this one lucid dream where he was looking at a man in a turban. And the man in the turban kept asking, "What's my name? What's my name?" And finally, the lucid dreamer said he knew this guy. And finally, it occurred to him, and he said, "Nanak." And the figure nodded his head and said, "Yes, and now I want to talk to you about your spiritual path." And they sat there in the lucid dream and talked about their spiritual path. Well, this young guy, he was a mechanical engineer in waking life, and he woke up and thought, Nanak, who the heck is Nanak? And he Google searches Nanak and finds out that Nanak was one of the founders of the Sikh religion. And he was blown away when he discovered that. So yes, sometimes I think in the lucid dream space or in dreaming itself that time isn't linear and that time is a spacious present. And so I think therefore you can interact with people across space and time.
Great. And do strong feelings for the deceased impact the likelihood of having a dream of a deceased person?
You know, it can be both helpful and harmful. If it's too extreme, it's almost like you're too emotionally caught up in it, and it's not for the best. I think it really helps to kind of ratchet it down a little bit and just, you know, wait until you're in a good state of mind where things are on kind of an even keel.
So we have a lot of questions about the relationship between dreams and lucid dreaming and other sort of forms of a consciousness or experience. So someone asks about past life and reincarnation. Someone asks about out-of-body experiences. Someone was asking about hypnosis. So is there overlap in these things, or how do they differ?
Right. So with out-of-bodies and astral travel, oftentimes I remind people that the definition of a lucid dream is realizing within a dream you're dreaming, and you're having a dream and then you see something odd and become lucidly aware. But oftentimes an out-of-body might occur when you're having a heart attack and all of a sudden you're floating on the ceiling and you see the medical ambulance come and try to revive you. So there's not really realizing within a dream that you're dreaming and that kind of out-of-body experience. Also, other people have out-of-body experiences when they're trying to fall asleep and they start to hear humming and buzzing, and now they realize that they're seeing themselves from 6 feet above the bed. So again, you haven't really realized within a dream you're dreaming. So I tell people OBEs compared to lucid dreams, it's like a mountain cat versus a house cat. They're similar, they're in the same family, but a mountain cat and a house cat really aren't technically the same. So they're similar, but not the same. When it comes to past life, I originally had a chapter in my first book on how to engage past life selves in lucid dreaming. But my editor told me the book had gotten to be so long that she tossed out that chapter. But there are ways of engaging past life and gaining past life information in a lucid dream. And also the other one, hypnosis. There was one study done by Paul Dane, I believe at the University of Virginia, where he worked with undergraduates who were easily hypnotizable. And I think almost 60% of them had a lucid dream within 2 or 3 days after their first hypnotic situation. So anyway, hypnosis connects in some regards. Yeah.
Wild. Melinda says, does the study of lucid dying provide any clues to the nature of time?
Right. That's a wonderful question. In lucid dreams, sometimes we get information outside of our own knowing. Like, for example, when I finally did meet my father in a lucid dream, it was 3 years later. He was coming down a gold ladder. And I thought, well, wait a second, is this my dad as a deceased spiritual being, or is he just a dream figure, a symbol of my grief? And so when he came down, I asked him a question. I said, Dad, when do you think mom's going to pass away? And he said, oh, in 2 to 6 years. I said, of what? And he said, a heart attack. And I asked him another question, and then he told me to please be quiet because he came to tell me things. But what happened almost 2 years later, exactly, my mom was in the hospital and almost died of a heart condition. And then a few years after that, she went back to the hospital and almost died again of a heart condition because of a prescribed medicine that later they determined was harming people's hearts. But she made it through that 2 to 6 year period. So again, it appears you can get information sometimes, but it might not always be best working with a deceased dream person. You might what I call engage the awareness behind the dream. Just ignore the dream figures and basically ask your unconscious mind.
Great. Well, Gosha says, how would you distinguish between a visitation dream and the projection of a mind projection of a deceased person?
Right. So oftentimes you can tell right away, like the deceased dream figure won't look you in the eye, doesn't engage you, doesn't have any questions for you. It's just kind of there like a potted plant is in your house or something. That's one way you can tell that they're really basically hollow, that they exist there as a projection of your mind, of your thoughts. In a lucid dream, you can announce, now all thought forms must disappear. And then normally all the projections of your mind begin to disappear. That's one way of going about it. But then the other way is, like I was mentioning a moment before in my conversation with my dad, just ask questions. When you ask questions of the deceased dream figure, if they can't respond or don't have any response, then there's a good chance they're just a projection symbol of your grief.
Does fasting help with lucid dreaming?
I do think fasting might be one of those things that does help. Sometimes in native cultures, when they'd go on a vision quest, fasting was oftentimes part of it. And I have noticed in my own life, on certain times when I've fasted, it seems to lead to more interesting psychological experiences and also lucid dreams on occasion. But any number of things could help. I notice on the nights I do Iyengar yoga, those nights I'd have a lucid dream, and it's oftentimes seem I just raise my level of energy, and spontaneously a lucid dream would occur.
So I think this is in response to the question you just asked right before this. Are you saying that you can access information about your future by asking your subconscious rather than a dream figure? Right.
That's what I'm saying, but it becomes a little bit problematic. One time I was seeking out future information about myself within a lucid dream, and I was told that they could provide me future information, but the decisions that I would make along the way towards that future would also come into play. And so that's when you get into this idea of probable realities, that decisions you make now alter the course towards that future event.
Okay. How does physical healing work in a lucid state?
Right. The first person to talk about this that I was aware of was Ed Kellogg, who has a PhD in biochemistry from Duke. And long ago in the 80s, he punctured his tonsil with a shish kebab that he was enthusiastically eating. And he didn't go to the doctor, but what happened, he developed an infection, and now he had red lines running up and down the side of his face, and it was all inflamed and very painful. And so he decided to either have a OBE or a lucid dream, and he had a lucid dream that night. And within the lucid dream, he affirmed that his infected tonsil was being healed. And he said when he woke up, about 90% of the pain was gone. Within 2 hours, the red lines went away, the infection went away. And from there, he began to explore it even more. And so there's been some extraordinary examples of people healing themselves of issues that the doctor couldn't help with, or medicine, Western medicine couldn't help with. And some of these are in our magazine, but we'll definitely talk about them in the upcoming workshop.
Great. Well, we do have a few more minutes with Robert, but before I ask you for your last thoughts or we get to any last questions, I want to share a couple of things. As we've mentioned, we're hosting a 4-week online workshop with Robert called Lucid Dreaming and Living Lucidly, Gateway to the Inner Self. This is offered in partnership with our friends at Glidewing, so we thank them. And it's designed both for the inexperienced beginner as well as those who have ventured far along the lucid dreaming path. So the workshop offers a lot of practical instruction via streamed video, which you can watch at any time during the workshop. And we've also included 4 special live sessions with Robert specifically to dive into participant questions. So if you'd like to explore the power and potential of lucid dreaming in your own life, please do consider joining us. So now in our last minutes, I just love to check in with you, Robert. Do you have some last remarks you'd like to share? We've got about 5 minutes. Should I go to a couple more questions? What would you like to do?
But why don't we have a couple more questions and just give me a minute to...
All right. Fantastic. Marina says, I have recurring dreams that I ask myself if I'm dreaming or not. And the answer is always no, that I'm awake. Is this considered a lucid dream too?
Right. So you're right at the threshold, right at the doorway of becoming lucidly aware. You sense that this might be a dream, and now you're beginning to question. And that's when we would suggest you do a reality check. Like you might put out your finger and begin to pull it. And if your finger starts to grow, then you know this is a dream. Or you might want to jump in the air and see if you float. Because if you float, then you know this is a dream. But sometimes we have to do reality checks to confirm that, oh, yes, this is a dream.
How do we subscribe to your magazine?
You know, that's very easy. If you go to luciddreamingmagazine.com, just type that out, luciddreamingmagazine.com. There you can read the current issue, past issues, and just click the free subscribe button. But with my friend Lucy Gillis in Vancouver and I have been doing it for 20 years, and it's just amazing. We'll do special issues on healing in lucid dreams, or deceased people in lucid dreams, or getting information outside of space and time in lucid dreams. It's really fascinating what the community of lucid dreamers are doing and what they're discovering on their own.
Yeah, and it's completely free. This is a 20-year labor of love, and it's such a valuable gift to the lucid dreaming community. So thank you for that, Robert. Also, we'll be posting all of the references that Robert has been talking about through this and some of the things we've gotten in chat, along with the video on our website. So you can look for that later. In your opinion, do prescribed sleep medications block your ability to lucid dream?
You know, that's complicated. Sometimes you'll read in the side effects of some medication that it does tend to reduce dream recall. But on the other hand, there's other medications that might increase dream recall. So it varies there. For some of us, it's just a matter of increasing our focus and interest in dreams. And when we do that, we'll begin to get our dream recall muscles working again.
Bob says, I often have dreams where I'm having a dream in my dream. And when I quote unquote wake up, I wake up in another dream. What could this mean?
Yeah, there's some curious things we can do in dreaming. And that's oftentimes what I call a second level dream. Falling asleep within a dream and waking up at a different level. I'd be interested in to talk with Bob and find out a little bit more about his experience before I share my own thoughts any further.
Great. And people can reach out to you via your website, correct?
That's right. Just you can either go to our magazine or my website at lucidadvice.com and post a question there to me.
Fantastic. Well, we are up to our last minute. Oh my goodness, time flies so quickly. Robert, what are some of your last thoughts to leave us with today?
You know what? One thing that I really wanted to be so thankful about is that there's groups like the IONS group. That their idea that we exist in an interconnected oneness is something that I discovered in lucid dreaming. That not only is that interconnected oneness in this physical realm, but that interconnected oneness extends beyond the physical to other realms. And we truly do exist in a miraculous realm. So my thanks to IONS, to Kirsten, Eliana, and Elena, and Andrea. So hope to see some of you at our workshop. That'd be fun.
Fantastic. Thank you, Robert. We're so very grateful for you spending this time with us. And thank you, everybody, for tuning in around the world. We look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care. Bye-bye.